I'd like to thank our sponsors over at Natural Hemp Oil. Natural Hemp Oil sells all sorts of CBD products. And CBD, unlike THC by the way, is not psychoactive and it isn't going to get you high or anything like that. These products are just botanical supplements that also carry other nutrients like omega-3 fatty acids, vitamins, chlorophyll, and amino acids. They have a ton of different products like flavor drops that come in flavors like strawberry and blueberry. And if you're someone who suffers from sore muscles, aches, or pain, they also have a brand new soothing pain relief balm. Check out naturalhempoil.com, link is in the description.
So when I first heard that there was going to be a free speech conference, I was immediately excited. I love free speech. I could talk about it, and I do talk about it for hours on end, essentially, if you watch my video library. And I've been called a free speech warrior, sort of as a derogative term, but you know what? I don't mind that. Because in my opinion, free speech isn't just an important principle, an important concept, it's actually a human right. And in my opinion, it's actually one of the most important human rights because it's what allows us to discuss our other human rights. Without freedom of speech, we can't discuss things like the right to life and right to property. Without freedom of speech, we can't discuss things like the best way to govern. So it's really the gatekeeper of everything else we see happening in our government. And that's why I value it so much, and that's why I spend so much time on my channel and my videos talking about it. With that being said, I was shocked to find out that when this conference was announced, there were people who didn't feel as strongly about it. Because again, like to me, this idea was that that's amazing, so can't wait, immediately down. But there are a lot of naysayers out there, and regardless of anything that was happening in terms of organization, administration, there were people out there who just didn't like the idea of a free speech event. And in one camp, we had people who were a little bit apathetic about free speech, people who believed, well, I mean, we have free speech, right? We have the First Amendment in the West. You know, we don't prosecute people for having the wrong ideas. So why bother with an entire conference? I mean, like, you guys just want to go around and like say how great you are. There's no point. And on the other side, there are people who were a little bit more vocal about their disagreement and disapproval of the event. You had people who kind of said, now, you know what, this is not about free speech. You guys just want a platform to encourage hate speech and to spout your vitriolic ideology, your misogyny, your racism, your bigotry. Of course, we're talking about Dr. Summers. She's not here, so I can make that joke. So, no one tell her. But seriously, there are a lot of people who kind of took that approach to that, who believe that because we're standing up for free speech at this event, it's because we have nefarious purposes. And that's often the case when you talk about free speech. People always assume that you have something bad to say, and that's why you care about this issue. So that was surprising to me because maybe it's because I don't vary my YouTube videos that I watch enough, my news sources, but I usually assume that most people stand up for free speech and think that it's still an important thing worth fighting for. And I think if we look at this room and Western society in general, I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that we would probably believe that Western society in current year 2018 is the most free and open that it's ever been, right? And we're lucky for that, and that's actually verifiably true in a number of metrics. People can vote and own property, hold elective office, regardless of race, religion, gender, and orientation, something that I think is important and definitely has not been true historically. Additionally, justice systems, they're definitely not perfect, but we do have, and we're working toward, an extensive appeals process where if people feel that they haven't been heard, where their case hasn't been tried fairly, they're able to present further evidence and try and reach that verdict of justice. Again, police officers, another issue where things aren't quite perfect, but when you think about it, we have an entire branch of government that is just dedicated to trying to enforce laws that are designed to protect our life, liberty, and property. Again, that's a privilege that we have that has not been enjoyed by most people, not by our ancestors, and still currently not by billions and billions of people who live elsewhere. So, I mean, I just want to put that out there so you guys don't think that I'm too much of a naysayer, too much of a downer. We are lucky, we're doing good. However, with that being said, things are not all well when it comes to free speech in the West. And what's interesting about free speech is that if we look at other rights, things like voting rights, things like property rights, we've continually seen a progression toward more openness, more access, and more equality, which is great. But if we look at the past decade or so when it comes to freedom of speech, we're actually seeing the opposite of that. We're seeing a rollback protections of freedom of speech. And if you're anything like me, you kind of have to ask yourself, why is that? Why is that in our society, when we care so much about like freedom and liberty and we're trying to be progressive, why is it that when it comes to freedom of speech, we've been rolling things back? Like, that seems so weird. We have more human rights groups, more human rights advocacy than ever before, but at the same time, freedom of speech, when you look at things in the news, it seems like it's going backwards. And I've thought about that, and I think the reason is that when it comes to freedom of speech, there are people who can live in the most oppressive societies and go their entire lives without expressing themselves freely and openly without having any issues. And that's because freedom of speech restrictions, they almost by design inherently only affect and apply to fringe opinions, right? It's not the average toe-the-line centrist opinion that ever needs to worry about freedom of speech, and frankly, that's where most people in all societies stand. So when we're talking about freedom of speech, we're actually talking about minority rights. And I think that's why it doesn't get as much attention, it doesn't get as much advocacy, and sadly nowadays it's not getting as much protection. Because it's only the people with the unpopular opinions, the dangerous opinions, that ever have to fear reprisal. And frankly, A, there's not as many of them, and B, it's not that popular, as I've certainly found out, to stick up for their rights to say what they want to say. And if anyone thinks I'm being hyperbolic about the state of free speech currently, because I get that all the time, like, oh, there are instances, isolated incidents, sure, where freedom of speech, it's been wishy-washy, but overall, it's fine. No, it's not, sadly. In Germany, people's homes have been raided for Facebook posts. This has actually happened. In Canada, you can now face legal consequences for using the wrong pronoun for someone. These are things that are happening currently, and I'm Canadian, by the way, so that one concerns me especially. And in the UK, Count Dankula, who actually will be presenting a video, I think, tomorrow, was prosecuted for a comedy sketch involving a pug. And I feel like if your country is prosecuting people for pug-centric videos, you should know that something's wrong. Like, you've made some mistake somewhere, you probably need to dial things back and examine where you're standing. In France, like in many other European countries actually, and this might be shocking to us who live in the Americas, it is actually illegal to deny the Holocaust, right? You can actually face legal consequences, fines, even perhaps jail time for denying the Holocaust. And while I think that's obviously a wrong position, the idea that you can face government prosecution just for being wrong, and that's considered a criminal offense, that to me, and I think it should be to all of us, is a very worrying thing. I don't think any of that is acceptable, and I don't think it's just unacceptable. I think those are human rights violations, and I know that's a strong term to use, but honestly, I think it's fitting. I think it's appropriate. That's how important I think free speech is. And to anyone who might say, and I think we're probably on the same page here, but there are people out there who would say, no, like that's important. We have to control those kinds of hate speech, take in and rain down on people who would try to promote views like that the Holocaust isn't real, that pugs might be Nazi sympathizers. That's important work that we need to do. So in this speech, what I'd like to do is talk about why even dangerous ideas, even hate speech, yes, they are free speech, and it's so important that we consider them that. And now anytime I bring up free speech, like I mentioned before, you're going to get some opposition to the idea that it's not widely accepted. And you know what? If you look at the numbers, it seems like things are going down the right path. According to one Pew survey, when presented with the statement, "It is very important that people can say what they want without state or government censorship in our country," 71% of Americans, 65% of Europeans, and 61% of Canadians agreed. So if you're just presented with those numbers regarding free speech, you might think, hey, we're doing pretty good. Not so much Canada, that's a little low for my liking, especially since I live there, but overall, looking at those numbers, you would think free speech is doing great in the West. It has a plurality of support. We're on the right path. But if you look at the follow-up questions, if you dig a little bit deeper about people's beliefs when it comes to free speech, we start to see some issues. When asked if people should be able to make statements publicly that are offensive to someone's religion or belief, the numbers of support remained around the same in the US and Canada, 77% and 64% respectively. So yeah, I mean, in the Americas, we're not really that concerned with speech legislation regarding people's religious beliefs, but over in Europe, that's where we start to see a problem. despite a plurality of Europeans agreeing that, yeah, people should be able to say what they want, right? We just saw that from the previous numbers. 65% of Europeans, yes, people should be able to say what they want. But when asked about offending religious beliefs, only 47% of people said that you should be able to publicly say things that are offensive to someone's religion. So what happened there? From the first numbers, it would seem that, yeah, Europe's on the right stance when it comes to free speech, but when you kind of follow up, the support isn't really there anymore, which I thought was interesting. And when you actually ask follow-up questions, it gets even worse. When asked if people should be publicly able to make statements that are offensive to minority groups, researchers saw drops in support across the board, all countries. Europe's support for the right to offend minority groups was kind of similar to its right to offend religious groups, about 47%. So most people think that's not okay in Europe. That should worry each and every one of us. In the US, the drop was down to 67%, still quite high, but definitely much lower than the initial question. And in Canada, just 52%, slightly over half of people, said that it was okay to make public statements that offend minority groups. This is worrisome, and this is a trend that we see continually. People will say that they believe and support free speech, but the number of people who are willing to support that same free speech under uncomfortable circumstances is on a downward spiral. It's on a decline. So what happened here? What's the disconnect between these people's support for free speech, yet their opposition for uncomfortable speech? Right? There's clearly a disconnect going on, and it's not that uncommon. Like the numbers show, around 20% of Europeans say they support free speech, but don't want you to say anything offensive, and the numbers are around 10% in the US and Canada. And so I've met a lot of these people, especially online, and I like to call them free speech asterisk supporters, right? That's free speech with terms and conditions, right? Free speech with the thing you got to scroll through and then click accept to get to the next page, right? They're not just free speech period supporters. And thinking about this, it's funny, if you follow me on social media or any of my interviews, you'll know that I am a huge Dr. Phil fan. That's a guilty pleasure. I will not apologize. But one of my favorite parts of folksy Texan wisdom that he imparts on the show is the idea that if someone is using but a lot when expressing themselves, you can essentially almost disregard everything that came before the word but to get to what their opinion really is. And we see this a lot in people talking about their relationships in personal life. Let's say someone says, I'm not saying he's a bad boyfriend, but he never pays attention to me or asks how I'm doing or buys me stuff like my other friends' boyfriends. Right? I mean, she's trying to placate and be nice, but at the same time, she's saying he doesn't pay attention to me or ask how I'm doing, right? She's trying to be diplomatic, but we get what she really means. Another example that actually appears a lot on Dr. Phil. I'm not an alcoholic, but I do like to drink, which, I mean, I think we can all kind of imagine how those episodes play out. Those are my favorite. But we can use this same method of kind of decoding and deciphering where these free speech asterisk supporters really stand on the issue. For instance, and these are all phrases that I've heard a countless number of times, not just from random internet commentators, but from from journalists, from liberal media figures, and surprisingly and sadly, even from politicians. I support free speech, but I don't think people should be allowed to criticize people's religious beliefs. I'm for freedom of speech, but saying racist things shouldn't be permitted. I believe in the First Amendment, but the government should censor hate speech, right? And now, without those conciliatory prefaces, if we kind of ignore everything before the but of those phrases, we kind of see something and an opinion, a viewpoint, an ideology that looks nothing like free speech. So don't be fooled when someone just says, yeah, I think you should be able to say what you want, but like, no. I've been called an absolutist, a free speech radical, but honestly, I do think that free speech, by virtue and nature of being free speech, does have to include these controversial ideas. And the people who claim to be in favor of supporting free speech while at the same time advocating for free speech restrictions, literally in the same breath sometime, I'm not saying that they're being, deceitful or lying about their opinions. I just think they're being a little bit naive about what free speech actually means. Free speech, by design, has to include things you don't like hearing. Otherwise, it wouldn't be free speech because, as we all know, non-controversial speech doesn't need protections. Do you think it's illegal or not allowed for people in North Korea to go on about how much they love the dear leader and the one-party system? Right? Of course not. It's not illegal in North Korea to say how much you hate America and how awesome Kim Jong-un is, right? That's allowed. It's not against the rules in Saudi Arabia to praise the benefits of Sharia law and condemn the indulgences of the West. That's okay. It's also was not disallowed in East Germany to curse out those capitalist pigs, right? So you see, none of these places have had anything resembling free speech, but people were still allowed to say things that toed the status quo and were deemed acceptable to the ruling class. So I'm sorry, but if your opinion and your view of free speech is that it's okay for people to say things as long as it doesn't offend anyone, then I'm sorry. But you have the same view of free speech as each one of those totalitarian states. It's not free speech. And I think why some people might enjoy bearing the cause of free speech superficially while at the same time having issues with its core tenets is that we like the idea nowadays of being seen as being pro-liberty, pro-freedom. It's all about being progressive and open, right? It sounds amazing. Free speech, yes, let's marketplace of ideas, it's great. However, the reality of freedom of speech and what I think a lot of people are faced with that causes them to become a little bit opposed to it is when you hear something you don't like, right? Because then free speech isn't just fun and open, then it's painful, then it's scary, and then frankly, it's hard work, right? Because if we want free speech to say what we want, it kind of, unfortunately for some people, includes people we don't like saying what they want, right? And that's what's so scary to some people. It means that if we want our views to flourish under free speech, we actually have to defend, we have to debate, we have to research, we have to stand up for what we believe in. It's not enough to just say, it's okay, we'll just censor other opinions. If we want to be free speech advocates, that means we actually have to engage with those bad ideas. That means we're actually going to be held accountable for the views that are allowed to prosper in our society. And that's a lot of responsibility. And frankly, it is intimidating. And if you're someone who maybe isn't as sure of your conviction as if you're someone who's not as confident in your ability to dismantle other people's arguments or be able to describe and I guess succinctly express why you believe what you believe, it sounds like a bad thing, right? Like, what? I have to actually defend my position? No, I don't like that. It's a lot easier for people like that to just say, no, let's shut down debate. But what I find so ironic about that perspective of the anti-free speech crusaders is that when they're arguing about censorship being permissible or censorship being a good thing in certain situations, I feel like they never for once imagine themselves as the minority or opposition group, right? And you see this for kind of like all of the authoritarian or totalitarian people in the political discourse. Whenever they're advocating all of these harsh, strict government policies, they never really imagine what it would be like to be on the receiving end of those policies, right? They have a very, I guess, utopian view. Like, no, it'll be great in the, I guess, like military state. I'll be one of the good guys, and then we'll just be, I guess, prosecuting anyone who disagrees with me personally. That's rarely how those states ever work out. But this applies especially to the progressive, I put that in quotes, more like regressive left, people who might advocate for very strict authoritarian social justice policies. They want what's comfortable for them to be allowed, and they think that that's free speech. But when it comes to anything that's outside of the norm, all of a sudden they should be the ones who decide what is and what is not okay, and they believe that they should have that power, because when these people say they want free speech restrictions, they're not just encouraging those restrictions, they are, at least by implication, saying, and I should be the one to decide what is right and what is wrong. And so that's kind of an inherent problem I see to free speech restrictions. The idea that everyone should be able to speak their minds equally, regardless of opinions, that's something you don't really need any fairness to apply, right? Because it's the hands-off approach. It's sort of the egalitarian, libertarian perspective on things. But even if we were, and I don't think we should, to accept the idea that we should censor hate speech, the question becomes, what is hate speech? And I know some people might think that I'm being a little bit obtuse when I say this, but no, it's not always black and white, clear cut as to what is explicitly hateful things. And that's what we're seeing a lot of times in the social media debate. People people will get banned for things that someone, some random bot or maybe some anonymous moderator has deemed offensive. But is it, from my experience, a lot of the times it's not. And I think the idea that our current society has now reached a level of progress and understanding where we objectively know what is right and wrong is a little bit naive. If we look at the course of human history, there has not been one single empire or society that thought that they were the bad guys enforcing bad beliefs and bad laws. If we look at that through hindsight, obviously we see that's not the case. If someone thinks it's a good idea to ban harmful opinions, bring this up. 60 to 50 years ago, the idea of race mixing, interracial marriages, miscegenation, as it was called, was deemed a harmful opinion. Okay, that was the standard that they were working at back then. 60 years ago, the concept of desegregation, the idea that people of all skin colors should be able to live and mix freely in businesses and education and government, that was considered problematic. This is within people's lifetimes that are still alive today. 20 years ago, the notion that gay people should be able to get married was not politically correct. Right? So the idea that we possess a level of knowledge and enlightenment currently to objectively say what is hateful and what is not, I think is being very ignorant of the historical trends that we have seen throughout our culture and throughout every culture, frankly. And so any activist who campaigns for these censorship laws or regulations, I would like to ask them, would you have wanted the people who fought for your beliefs, which at one point were not the norm, would you have wanted your activists in the past to face the same barriers and obstacles that you are currently putting on people who you don't like? I'm pretty sure the answer would be no. And to kind of illustrate this a little bit more, I want to use some examples. We're gonna play a little bit of a game. We're gonna all pretend that we're one of those thought police bureaucrats, right? And we're gonna try to censor some things, decide whether it's hate speech or not. Okay, so we're operating under the assumption that hate speech is bad and we're gonna ban it, okay? If there's one thing that I'm pretty sure we can all agree would probably qualify as not okay under those terms, it's the phrase, women are inferior to men. Right? We can all agree that's not kosher. We shouldn't say that if we're going to be thought policing people. Okay, easy one. Let's throw a little bit of curveball here. How about this? Women, on average, score lower on spatial reasoning than men. Women are inferior on average when it comes to spatial reasoning abilities. Is that hate speech? Right. It's kind of similar to the first one, which we all kind of agreed was not okay. I mean, yeah, sure, there's like science to back that up, but I don't know. It seems to communicate the same message. So what do we do there? Is that okay or is that not okay? You know what? Better safe than sorry. Let's just censor it, right? We don't want any hate speech getting in there. Well, let's make sure everyone's feelings are safe. All right, next up, we have Muslims are terrorists. Okay? Is everyone a little bit uncomfortable now? Okay, good. That's another example where we kind of say, okay, regardless of your right-leaning, left-leaning, the phrase Muslims are terrorists, that's probably not okay to say. That's a little bit hateful. That shouldn't be allowed, okay? So easy. Ban it, not okay. Targeting a religious group, targeting a minority religious group, not going to let that happen. Okay, but then what do we have here? The majority of global terror incidents are carried out in the name of Islam. Is that hate speech? Again, right, because that, again, may be backed up by studies and data, but that's a little bit too close for comfort to the first statement, right? I mean, saying most terrorists happen to maybe practice Islam is kind of almost akin to saying Muslims are terrorists. No, not allowed. Let's not take any chances. Islamophobia, ban it, okay? Let's make things a little bit harder. I support the KKK. No one take that out of context, please. I'll be upset if that's on a. If I go on Twitter later and I see that being circulated, I'm going to be mad. Okay, guys. Exactly. But yes, said phrase. That's racist, right? That's not okay. You support the KKK. You can't say that. They're one of the few groups where I think everyone can agree they're a hate group. They're the kind of racists who actually admit that they're racist. Like they know, right? So obviously no place in modern society. Get rid of it. Not okay. But how about this? This is where things might get a little bit controversial for people. I support the KKK's right to freedom of speech and assembly. Is that hate speech? A lot of people who were in opposition to this event would say that, yeah, that's hate speech. And actually, if you look at studies show that there are a plurality of people in the West who believe that supporting someone's right to say something hateful is just as bad as saying that hateful thing yourself. So if someone's going out there and saying that they support the KKK's right to freedom of speech, that doesn't really sound okay, does it? And I think something the event organizers will be very familiar with, and something that I myself am even familiar with, is when you kind of take up that mantle of advocating for someone else's free speech rights, regardless of whether you agree with them or not, you're going to kind of have those opinions thrust upon yourselves as if you did. Because unfortunately, that's what advocating for free speech means in our current society. If you advocate for the right of the KKK to have freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, there are people who will see that as hate speech, because you're essentially saying that you support the KKK's right to say their hateful stuff. You might as well be a speakerphone, a platform for them. Something else that a lot of people may not understand or they may not see is that all of those examples, as crazy as they may sound, they're happening right now. James Damore was fired and subjected to just an enormous amount of slandering by the media because he brought up scientific facts and scientific studies that spoke to the cognitive differences and abilities between men and women. A lot of people took that as him saying that women were inferior to men. When it comes to Islam, a lot of people may say, oh, like, you're not going to get in trouble just for pointing out the facts. Tell that to someone like Majid Nawaz, Ayana Hirsi Ali, or even Tommy Robinson, right? I mean, these examples, we may laugh at them, it may be funny, but they're happening every day. And that's why I'm so glad this event is happening. We need to be able to talk about free speech. We need to be able to talk about the importance of free speech without being made into villains who only want to just trash minorities. Sorry about that, Bunty, but I mean, you're token here. But yeah, we need to get around that, and so that's why I'm so glad that this event is happening, and why I'm so happy that I'm able to be here and I'm able to listen to the amazing other speakers and panels we're going to be having. So thank you, and I would be happy to take your questions now.